What if the Cuban Missile Crisis did not prove that nuclear weapons keep the world safe? What if it proved the exact opposite? We are told the same story over and over again. That calm leadership saved the world. That rational men stepped back from the brink. That deterrence worked. But what if none of that is true? What if the world did not survive because the system was stable, but because it got lucky? Because messages were delayed? Because warnings were misread? Because someone, somewhere, chose not to follow protocol? That is not strategy. That is chance. And here is the part most people never question. After Cuba, leaders did not conclude that nuclear escalation was too dangerous. They concluded something far more dangerous, that it was manageable, that you could push right up to the edge and still pull back. That lesson did not stay in 1962. It shaped what leaders believed was possible after that. So tonight, we are not asking what almost happened. We are asking something much more unsettling. What if the Cuban Missile Crisis was not a warning? What if it was a successful experiment? And what if the world that followed was shaped by that belief? Let us start with the version everyone knows. In October 1962, American reconnaissance discovered Soviet nuclear missiles being installed in Cuba, 90 miles from Florida. The United States responded with a naval quarantine, not a blockade officially. Because words mattered when the stakes were nuclear. For 13 days, the world watched two superpowers circle each other. The United States demanded the missiles be removed. The Soviet Union demanded a way out. And the story ends with relief. The missiles leave Cuba. The world breathes again. And history textbooks leave you with a comforting conclusion. This crisis proved that leaders will step back, that nuclear weapons prevent war, that rationality wins in the end. It is a nice story. It makes the world feel governed. It makes catastrophe feel avoidable. And it quietly teaches you something, that the system worked. But here is what that story hides. The people in charge were not playing a clean game of chess. They were making decisions inside fog. They did not have perfect information. They did not have perfect control. They did not even have a perfect map of what the other side could do in real time. Both governments assumed command chains were tight. Both assumed escalation would be visible. Both assumed there would be time to think. And that is the illusion. In nuclear crises, leaders imagine they are controlling machines, but they are actually controlling organizations. And organizations are messy. They have misunderstandings. They have delays. They have ego. They have fear. They have people trying to do the right thing at the worst possible moment. So, when we praise the crisis as a triumph of restraint, we are praising something we cannot guarantee. Not judgment, not wisdom, but a temporary alignment of imperfect humans. The most terrifying part of the Cuban Missile Crisis is not a dramatic countdown to launch. It is how many moments were not dramatic at all. A radar blip, a plane that drifts off course, a captain who thinks he is under attack, a commander who cannot reach the right person, a message that arrives too late. This is the real anatomy of nuclear danger. Not villainy, not madness, but routine friction, normal errors, human stress. And here is the twist that should make you uncomfortable. The world did not survive because every rule was followed. The world survived because, in more than one moment, someone did not do exactly what the system expected. Someone paused. Someone doubted. Someone waited. Someone chose not to turn uncertainty into escalation. That is the opposite of stability. That is a system that requires exceptions to survive. And if a system requires exceptions to survive, then it is not safe. It is merely undefeated. So if you are watching this thinking, yes, but it worked, ask yourself what you mean by worked. Did it work because the design is reliable? Or because, by luck, the weakest links held? Because if the Cuban Missile Crisis was saved by luck, then it was not solved, it was postponed. Now comes the most dangerous part of this story. Not what almost happened, but what people learned from what did happen. After Cuba, leaders did not hold a global funeral for the system that almost killed them. They adjusted procedures, they improved communication, they installed a hotline, and then they moved on. Because the conclusion in Washington and Moscow was not, never again. It was, we can handle this. The crisis became proof of competence, proof of control, proof that escalation could be calibrated. That belief is intoxicating because it does not feel reckless. It feels professional, it feels like skill. But here is the moral trap. Surviving a disaster does not prove the method is safe. It only proves you got away with it. If you swerve into oncoming traffic and do not crash, you did not discover a clever driving technique. You discovered you were lucky. But nations do not think that way. Nations turn survival into confidence, and confidence becomes doctrine. So, the Cuban Missile Crisis did something subtle to the people with power. It did not scare them into permanent humility. It taught them that the edge was survivable. And if the edge is survivable, then next time, you can push closer. This is where the story stops being about Cuba. Because once a superpower believes it can manage the brink, it starts seeing brinkmanship everywhere. Not as a nightmare, as a tool. A way to win without total war. A way to signal strength. A way to force concessions. A way to prove resolve. And once that logic takes hold, it changes how leaders see conflict. They become less afraid of escalation. They become more afraid of looking weak. They start making choices that assume crises are controllable. Not because they are evil, but because the last crisis ended with applause. That is why Cuba matters as a sequel to Vietnam. Vietnam was filled with leaders trying to find the point where pressure becomes victory. How far can you go? How long can you stay? How much can you risk? Cuba did not create that mindset, but it validated it. It made the most dangerous idea in modern politics feel reasonable. That you can play with catastrophe and still walk away. So here is the uncomfortable question I want you to answer honestly. Did the Cuban Missile Crisis make the world safer? Or did it make powerful people more willing to gamble? Not just what happened in 1962, but what kind of world was allowed to follow? So what did the Cuban Missile Crisis really prove? Not that nuclear war is unthinkable, and not that leaders will always choose restraint. It proved something far more unsettling. That the world can survive catastrophic systems without ever fixing them. That luck can be mistaken for stability. And that survival can be misread as success. After Cuba, the lesson was not humility. It was confidence. The belief that escalation could be controlled, that you could push closer next time, that the edge was survivable. And once leaders believe that, they do not become safer. They become bolder. So maybe the most dangerous myth is not that the world almost ended in 1962. Maybe it is that we think the system worked. Because if the Cuban Missile Crisis was a success, then what exactly are we trusting today? Better leaders, better technology, better judgment, or the same fragile hope that next time someone gets lucky again? And if that is what is holding the world together, then the real question is not how close we came. It is how many times we are willing to test it. Pick a side in the comments. Was Cuba a warning that humbled power? Or a success that taught power the wrong lesson? And do not just answer yes or no. Explain what you are trusting, the system or the luck.